Hello and welcome to the Aquarius Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Reed. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by OASE, makers of fine filtration products like the BioMaster canister filter and BioPlus internal filters. Let's talk about the BioMaster for a moment here. With its removable pre-filter cleaning system, integrated heater option, and ultra whisper quiet technology, what is not to love about this filter? If you're in the market for a new canister filter, you owe it to yourself and your fish to check out the OASE BioMaster canister filter. Use the links in the show notes and check out these great products. Now, on to the interview. Today's date is Tuesday, August 27th, 2019. My guest today is Andy Biro of Xtreme Foods. So this is another first for the podcast. We are in the hotel kind of dining lobby area of a Hampton Inn outside the Miami International Airport. And why am I at a hotel airport recording an interview? Well, Andy and his brother Rick were gracious enough to take me over to their fish farm, so Florida Exotic Fish Sales, and had a fantastic fish tour that you guys will be able to see content of, video footage of on the Aquarium Co-Op YouTube channel. So that should be coming out sometime in the near future. So depending on when you're listening to this, may or may not be time relevant. But hey, go over, check it out. So Andy, you are you and Keita, your wife, lovely wife, are the owners of Xtreme Fish Food, yep, which is a fantastic fish food brand. And so you've been my tour guide today, kind of the reason why I came out here. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The whole thing got started with my brother. I just took it over in the last year or so. He used to be an adjunct of the farm. And as Randy will tell you later on when he's talking about the farm is 100% takes his time. He just had no time to do anything with Xtreme. So I joined him about 9 years ago and started doing most of the work. And then just recently I bought him out. And we're still together with it, but he's concentrating on the farm, and I'm concentrating on Xtreme Aquatic food.
So I like that you jumped straight into that summary right there. But let's start with who Andy Biro is. So where do you get your start in the hobby? Take me back in the time machine and the Wayback Machine, and how did you get into tropical fish?
Well, I think what happened was when we were back at Florida State, I got out of Up With People, which was a traveling group I was with, went to Florida State where my brother was already going to school there. He had an aquarium. I put an aquarium in my apartment.
Freshwater or saltwater?
Freshwater.
Okay.
Everything was freshwater back then. I think I remember had gouramis and rams and killifish. And I think my favorite fish that I had at the time was an archer fish.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever seen one.
Yeah.
They were brackish water, and we strung a little piece of string over the top of the aquarium, and we'd put like a mealyworm on it, and the archer would zap it off with water.
Yeah, nice. We have a pretty sweet video on the YouTube channel of archer fish shooting a Sarah O-Nip tab, so that's pretty cool. And they've also shot into Corey's auto feeder that he had over his 800-gallon, and they completely ruined an expensive, nice auto feeder. Yes. And then they've actually shot water at him while he's on his computer. So that's
they can be little buggers, but that's what got us into it. And then I was director of youth affairs for the Democratic Party of Florida when I was in my senior year in college, and I was working for McGovern, if you can believe it, and I was in Washington, D.C. at the National Convention at Watergate. If you remember Watergate.
Okay, yeah. Oh, I mean, I know of the
Well, it's interesting because the office that was broken into by those guys was the Youth Affairs office, which was where I worked.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I met a guy there who had a friend in New York who had a friend in Malawi. And they had just come back from Malawi, and they had these gorgeous, you saw them at the farm, those mbunas, the yellow, the oranges, and they almost looked like saltwater fish. And he had some in his aquarium up there, and he just brought them back in his luggage from Africa. So we talked to Mike Segal, who was up there in New York, and we said, how can we find these? And he said, you can get there. There's a guy in Monkey Bay. His name is Peter Davies. And we started researching it. And Axelrod, from TFH Magazine, had gone down there and just done some stuff. So Rick and I, when we graduated from Florida State, we got on an airplane and flew down to Malawi, went to Monkey Bay and met with Peter Davies and started importing.
Wow.
And we were the first legitimate importers of African cichlids from the southern part of the lake back in 1972 or 1971.
What was that like back in the early 70s of going there? Was this your first time going to Africa?
Yes. Okay. Oh shoot, yes. Yeah. I'll tell you, the first thing was we got off the airplane in Blantyre, my brother and I. And you remember this is the 70s, and we had hair down over our ears. And when we got off the airplane, the police came up to us and took us both to a barbershop and had our hair cut.
The local police took some foreigners.
Us to the thing. Very kind, very nice, but they said you're not allowed to have long hair in Malawi. They took us and had our hair cut. So what that did, remember Rick told you the story about the hippos? That set us late.
No, tell the story about the hippos too. Yeah, I mean, well, let's not leave any stone unturned.
So that
here.
we were supposed to drive from Blantyre to Monkey Bay, so we rented a car, but because of this haircut thing, we were about 2 hours behind. So when we got to Monkey Bay, to the hotel, which we had a reservation for, it was closed. Mm-hmm. It wasn't late. It was probably 10 o'clock. Uh-huh. But they were closed. So what we did was we drove around back, and we were in this little car, and we just stayed in the car overnight. And we heard rumbling and messing around and stuff. Next morning we got up and checked in and had breakfast, and they said, "Where were you?" I said, "Well, we got in late, so we stayed around back. And they said, "You're still alive," because it's a hippo thing, They thought we were gods or something.
Oh, my goodness.
But that was our first trek into African cichlids, and we started bringing them over when we were in Tallahassee, and they would come into Miami, and we would go down there in a truck, pick them up, and drive them up to Tallahassee. Then we went back a second time, and we met a guy named Eric Fleet. And then we went back a third time, and we met some other people, and we went up into the Congo, Tanganyika, Lake Tanganyika. We went up into Lake Victoria, up where we've got some of the Du Boisian stuff.
And I'll embarrass myself on my African geopolitical history, but as far as being able to go into the Congo in the 70s, was it not?
Well, the Congo is on the west side, right. So we only went into, back then it was called Zaire. Uh-huh. And we only went in there in the main city and talked to some people. We didn't actually go off into the.
Was it still kind of a time though that you didn't really want to go?
Yeah. Mainly because you want to get sick because of all the malaria and stuff.
Okay.
But in Malawi, Mozambique, Tanganyika, Lake Victoria, you could move around in those absolutely no problem at all. Get a car and drive anywhere you wanted. The people, the real people. The Africans that live there are the most gentle people. I'll tell you something that's kind of sad, though. AIDS, the biggest country, the most AIDS is concentrated anywhere in Africa is in Malawi.
Oh, wow.
Right around Lake Malawi, where all these beautiful fish come from. So AIDS has torn that country apart. It's unbelievable. But anyway, back to the story. So when we graduated Florida State, we moved to Miami. We bought the 5 acres, which Rick is on right now. And then Rick has a biology degree, and you could tell from being with him, he knows this stuff hands down.
Yeah.
Nobody else was doing this. And by the way, all this time, what I did was sales. All the food preparation, the farm, the water, the ponds, that was all Rick. He knew how to do all that stuff. So it just kind of grew from that, and then as the fish started coming in, as Rick started moving into breeding, all we had back then was trout chow, Purina trout chow.
Say that 10 times fast.
Right.
Purina trout chow.
So Rick came up with that mixture you had today: krill, shrimp, spirulina, some fillers,
and the
rice,
baby, yeah,
the baby rice baby food. But that was the thing that kind of held it all together. And then over the years, he slowly got that moving from a mixture that he just threw in the water to something that his people wanted, because the fish weren't coming in to their stores and weren't keeping the same vibrant colors. So he pelletized it, and he put it in bags. And then maybe 9 years ago, I helped him move it into jars, and we started really pushing it.
Yeah, and I mean the colors of these fish that are on the fish farm are the level of vibrancy of the colors was just absolutely astounding. And I'll take your guys' firsthand knowledge from it, but you kept saying that no, these are the colors like you would see in the wild.
They are,
if not sometimes more vibrant. But to be on par with what you see in the wild, and some of that being just the husbandry skills that you guys have on the farm, with Rick actually having his hands involved, now knowing that he actually has a biology degree, that background, and all the pieces start falling into place. Kind of hindsight after the fact.
Yep.
But I mean, the colors were absolutely striking, and sure, it was warm and humid, but I kind of wanted to just get in there and swim with them to have that little micro Malawi feel of wow, this is what it's like to be in Lake Malawi and swim with these beautiful fish. I mean, Rick's trying to talk to me about what's in each vault, and as I'm walking, my eyes just keep getting caught by these darting oranges and blues and the iridescence. It was,
and he even pointed
astounding.
out to you that the fish that he had because he tries to keep wild caught. He brings in wild caught on a regular basis so that he can keep his breeding stock pure. And he showed you the difference between the colors and the fish that came in and just came in wild and the ones that were in his tanks. And the only difference was the size.
Yeah.
Because they don't get the food in the lake big enough to get big, but the colors are the same.
Yeah.
Whether they were here or whether they were there, the colors, and that's what makes Xtreme kind of unique. And what really is cool is that 1.5 pellet that we use is all that he feeds at the farm. Big, little, aggressive, non-aggressive. That pellet is what he uses.
Yeah, I think even the dovii, I think some 1.5 made it into these dovii little holding areas, which maybe you can go back and kind of explain that, because people are like, wait, I thought we were talking about African cichlids, now you're talking about dovii on this farm. What's going on?
Well, the farm is really Rick, so I don't really know how he got them there, but I do know that the ponds all drain out into different areas where he holds them, and there'll be a large pits, and in those pits he's got some dovii in there. But the history of them, I don't know how they got there, but I know they're huge.
I think they were just inherently invasive, and they somehow made it over in probably a flood or a hurricane. Kind of that standard Hurricane Andrew story of every critter getting out during Hurricane Andrew into Florida.
Exactly.
But yeah, you've got these. I kept calling them Roman bathhouse style kind of ponds in the ground, or
like small swimming pools,
like
almost.
small swimming pools with actual steps, and you've got the moss that's been growing on them, plants have been growing on them, so they have this very ancient kind of Roman antique feel to them. And in these, there were two of them. One was primarily dovii, the smaller one, which was still 2,000 gallons probably, and then the much larger one that was in the center, or at least it seemed like it was much larger, that had two massive pacus that were apparently brought to the farm by somebody, more dovii, a couple massive plecos.
And you got these all on film,
I did.
right?
I got those all on film, yeah, so hopefully the GoPro footage turned out pretty well, but that was, those were two incredibly unique treasures that, going into a tour, going into a fish farm or anywhere that, we go in this hobby, that was just something that I wasn't expecting. Completely surprised, and I'm still so enthralled by it that we're talking about it on this podcast a couple hours after the fish farm visit. So that was very unique.
And that farm has won practically every year when it was entered in the ACA conventions and in the FFFTA, Florida Tropical Fish Farmer Association. He won almost all the awards for year after year after year for that farm and how it produced and the kind of fish that he had in it. I mean, he spent 40 some odd years in that thing, and I keep pointing to him because Xtreme is really the left arm of Florida Exotic Fish, and I'm just kind of taking it, husbanding it on down the road here. But I mean, it got started there, it got proved out there, and even now, before we ship anything out, we ship it down to the farm and let him test it, make sure it's still online every month. That every order comes in, and every milled product works the same as it did years ago.
Yeah, I think
we don't change it. It's year after year after year. We don't change it.
That's a pretty good testament. If the food that you have, the food that you sell, is actually being used on a fish farm, and it's a fish farm that's winning awards, it's a fish farm that has incredibly healthy, beautiful fish. That's some pretty good proof in the pudding right there.
Absolutely.
So if we jump back, because I'm still so fascinated by your time that you've spent in Africa and Lake Malawi. So can you recall what your first experiences were like actually swimming in Lake Malawi?
Well, the lake is absolutely, it's huge. I mean, it's narrow, kind of narrow, but it's very long, and it's part of the Rift Valley. The Rift Valley has the three lakes in it. The southernmost lake is Lake Malawi, and eventually it trickles down underground and goes through the Shiri River and down all the way into Victoria Falls. And then as it goes north, it's a long sliver of a lake, and then there's a little bit of land mass, and then it becomes Lake Tanganyika, which is the second largest. Malawi's the smallest, but Tanganyika's the second, if I remember right. This has been 40 years. And then Lake Victoria is the largest lake, and it's the north. And actually, Lake Victoria has the least colorful fish, but it's all that stuff that Tamala was showing you. Those I don't even know the names of them anymore. But so the shell dwellers and all that kind of stuff.
The black calvis.
That all comes from Victoria. And Lake Victoria was very, very hard to get fish out of back then. Rwanda, there was all that trouble in Uganda. Remember that Idi Amin?
Yeah.
He was all back in there killing people left and right. But like Tanganyika, we would get to it by going to Kenya, and then you drive 500 or 600 miles, I'm thinking, it seemed like it, west till you get to the lake and do some fishing. But we spent most of our time on Lake Malawi, and we went around Monkey Bay, which is in the southern part, the Shiri River, which is over kind of toward the east, and then we'd go up Mozambique, all the orange, not peacocks, but what do they call those things? I forgot what they're. Anyway, they came from Mozambique side, and then up on the left side, the Stuart Grant had some stuff at the bottom, and then we took an airplane. I flew in a small, I think it was a 182 or 206, and we flew from Monkey Bay all the way up to Lacoma Island, and that was like an hour's trip. And there's this little island in the middle of nowhere, the northern part of Lake Malawi, and it's on the right side is Mozambique, on the left side is Malawi, and there's this church there. There's this church on this island, and we landed and looked at the fish and stuff. We went up and visited. It's marvelous. And we were back then. I'm an old guy, Back then we were watching Tarzan on Sundays, Sunday afternoon. So it was like us being,
Wow. So if you were to take a guess, how many days in country on continent do you think that you've spent in Africa? For fish.
Not that. Maybe. I think Rick and I together, maybe we spent 6 months, off and on.
That seems like a pretty significant amount of time.
But that's over 5-6 years.
Yeah.
Because we went over there and actually set up collecting stations, hired locals, and we
that's got to
managed.
That's got to put you to at least like the top echelon of people in America that have spent time.
We were in
that area.
We were in our 20s and 30s, yeah. So,
wow.
In our 20s, yeah.
Did you guys have any idea that, what you were starting then or that first trip to Africa, that this is...
No.
What?
No, as long as we had enough money for pizza, we were fine. We both drove nice cars, and we had pizza whenever we wanted it, and that was all we were... We loved fish, and we loved doing what we were doing.
Nice. So give me some other stories from Africa. I have to imagine that...
if I can't think of any, I'll make some up. Let me think. Well, I mean, I guess the trips to Africa were good, but some of the most interesting things were getting over there. We went one time. The actual fish came from Monkey Bay. We flew on a VC-10, which is a British Airways, and we flew from there to Kenya, and then we flew up to London, and in London we'd have to reoxygenate everything. And then it flew to Miami, and it got to Miami. We had to reoxygenate everything, and then we brought it up to Tallahassee at the time. We drove it up there. So there's all kinds of little trips and trails, little side trails on that journey that the fish went on, and we ended up by phone tracing them into Cyprus, or one time we went into Germany, and we met some very interesting people all on the way. But it's
and you don't have WeChat. You're not doing Facebook Messenger back then. You don't have any of these instant
Here's how you make a call. You call up a long distance operator and you say, I want to set up a call to this thing for this time of night. And then you sit by your phone while they put the call together, and if you set up for like 2 a.m., you got to be awake at 2 a.m., and then they put the call through, and half of it, and all the stuff in Africa was over radio phone. There were no wires. Now, Europe, you could call, you couldn't dial it, but you could get an operator to get it for you. But Africa, it had to be set up because someone had to go out and get the person, and they'd come into a radio phone. There was no dialing. There was no wires in Africa when we went there.
I feel so ashamed that I feel like I'm so soft and squishy from like a technology, like a technology baby that
there was no computers back then.
That there was nothing. Like how you could orchestrate the movement of these fish, these fish on a multinational, multi-leg journey, and then have to do things like, set up operator calls.
It's all done like the space thing. It's all done by time. You know that this amount of time the airplane goes from here to here, and then if it got past that point, the airlines were all hooked together. I mean, they had teletypes back then, those machines. So we could check in Tallahassee. We could go down to Eastern Airlines because if it came into Miami on Eastern, and they could track it, say, yep, it got on the flight, the VC-10 to Nairobi, and then it got from Nairobi to London, and it's in London right now, and then we'd get in touch with the transshippers being reoxygenated. So we could follow it that way, but it was paper, and it wasn't like it is now.
So from a technology standpoint, obviously you don't have the advantages of instant communication like we have now, but from like a customs clearance, from a fish and wildlife, were things a little bit easier back then than what you've...
Oh, yeah. Well, there's no drugs. back when there was no way it was importing drugs. So that's what slows everything down. Now they're looking for drugs. But as far as customs still checked everything, make sure you're not bringing in any prohibitive items. And those countries were kind of new at it, so they didn't monitor what we were taking out of their countries. But now they monitor that now.
Yeah. Can you recall like the conditions of the lake in terms of kind of that environmental impact? Because now when I have people like Greg Steves, Pam Chin, these other folks that are very in touch with what's happening in those lakes, that they point to the devastation of Nile perch, the water hyacinth, deforestation, the runoff into the shallows, just the habitat destruction. Did you see signs of that back then? No,
crystal clear. And most of the coast was inhabited by natives that were living right on the coast. They would get on these little boats that were no more than a couple of trees hollowed out. They'd go out and they'd have these nets and bring these fish in, filled with their nets, put them on shore. The sun would bleach them. They'd die there on the shore, and the sun would bleach them till they were dry, and they would eat them. And they would sit there. The women would sit there with corn and beat the corn, and grind it by hand. And the lake was just surrounded by the natives of Africa. It was their lakes, and they just naturally knew how to take care of it. The water was crystal clear. There was forests were beautifully green. I mean, it was just like it was if you go look at an old Tarzan movie. That's what it looked like.
Do you have any wildlife close calls?
Other than that hippo thing, no. The lake was pretty. Again, I went there and did a lot of taking pictures, and Rick was in the water a lot. He was the biologist. He wanted to see the fish. I was kind of not as much into it as he was, but no, it was no close calls. And I caught malaria on one of the trips, but got back and took care of that. We ate well. We ate like kings there because we stayed in hotels and motels, and they took care of us like we were kings. Everything was cheap.
What was the last year that you were in Africa?
I went over there with what's her name? 1978, 79. Probably 78.
Okay. 78, 79. Do you ever have any itchings at all whatsoever to go back?
No, not anymore. I mean, it would be grueling. It's a grueling trip, long trip.
Do you think part of it might also be that if you get there, you would kind of see all those things that I talked about, the deforestation, and it would be a little depressing for you, having seen it in its past condition.
Now I get to do things like I was in Sydney, Australia, 2 years ago, and took the tour with our distributor out there, and he took me around through all the different towns and stuff that had our food, and that was a good trip. And then Keita and I were over in Europe last year at Super Zoo, and we got to see some
Interzoo, right?
Interzoo.
Super Zoo is Vegas,
right? Interzoo in Nuremberg, and we had a great time there. That was my second time, her first time there. And we've gone to Canada. We just got back from Philip's show, so we get to do a lot of traveling, but it's shorter trips, and it's all comfortable now.
So let's talk about the Xtreme lineup then. So you've shared some wonderful experiences of you and your brother going to Africa and your hippo story, and just kind of what it took to actually export fish back then. So now let's give you a chance to talk more about the Xtreme food line. So what are some of the I guess give me kind of a sales pitch. Like, let's sales pitch.
Okay, I would say that the core of our product is the Pee-wee. We call it the Pee-wee. It's the 1.5. We actually make it in two sizes, the 1.5 and the 3.0.
And I'm going to stop you too. So once you do that, I really want you, because on the car drive back, you went into detail some of the quality lengths that Xtreme goes to, because it's produced here in the United States, kind of the salmonella check and those things. So I want you to dive into that quality aspect. But
right.
do the lineup.
Right. The lineup. Okay. First, the food. The 1.5, which is the core of our line. We offer it with little minute changes in it. We offer it for beta. We offer it for cichlids. We offer it for community fish. We offer it for saltwater. I think those are and goldfish. That line with that particular formula, and the crux of that formula is krill, shrimp, spirulina. Those are the three main ingredients that make up that formula. Now, if you get into scrapers,
let me stop you right there, because I like scrapers. We'll talk about that. But what makes krill so special as an ingredient?
Krill is basically a shrimp, but it's an entire. We use the entire animal. We don't just take the meat out of it. We use the scale, the ectoskeleton of it. The whole animal is of value because you get your calcium out of it. You don't have to have anything artificial. So by using krill in the food, you don't have to add a lot of artificial stuff to it.
And it already has that natural red color, right? So
exactly. So do the shrimp. The shrimp have the pink in it.
What are those, carotenoids, I think is the term? Yeah.
Yes. And herring, we use herring because it's kind of it's an oily fish, but we don't put any oil on. We don't oil coat our food, so it has to have a little bit of oil in the product. So we use herring, we use octopus. By the way, everything we use is sustainable. In other words, we don't fish. None of our stuff is fished in any area where it's not constantly being reproduced. We're not taken away from the environment. Our spirulina is made here in the United States. All of our products are milled in the United States. Everything, our labels, our jars, are all made in the United States. We all put together. So it's a USA completely branded product. And it's all checked for salmonella before anything goes out the door, even though the fish can't catch salmonella.
So that was something that I didn't even, we were talking about that on the car ride over, and it never even dawned on me that we would check food for salmonella, especially something that's not for human consumption. So what's kind of the thought process behind that?
Most people that don't have the click lid feed their fish by either sprinkling in there or putting it in their hand or pinching it with their fingers. Yep. Well, when you touch the fish food, if it has anything that can produce salmonella, and then you put it in to your lips or your face, it can be a problem for humans, especially for children. So, as an American-made product, it has to go through an assay test where it's actually produced and it sits for 2 weeks, and a test is made when it's right out of the mill, out of the extruder, and then another test is made at the end of the 2 weeks. And if the lab sees any changes in that test, then that load is even though it may not have any salmonella in it, it's destroyed.
Who's in charge of that? Is that FDA or is that like USDA requirement? USDA requirement? And why don't they impose that on food that comes from overseas?
Well, they have another thing called it's called APHIS, which is an international kind of a certificate that you have to get in order to bring food into this country. And why they don't do it with the assay program, I think it's because they according to the certificate says in their country, they abide by the rules of their country, whatever those are, and it may not be the same rules we have here.
That's good to know. So, I mean, it's one thing to talk about the quality of the fish food, how it's going to impact your fish, but now having this deeper understanding of, and especially with me having my 2.5-year-old in my fish room with me, helping me feed fish, like that's something I'd never considered. And then now I'm starting to draw, the lines are connecting because a recent article came out that pig ears, processed pig ears that are smoked and treated in some way as dog treats, which we have fed numerous times to our dogs, those have been showing up with salmonella on them. So people are being urged to wash your hands after you touch these pig ears. And then it makes me wonder, well, what other dog treats,
most
have
of the time,
potential?
Whenever you've heard of a salmonella problem, it's been an imported problem. It's not been something that's occurred in the United States.
We still have a bag of pig ears in my pantry, so I'm going to actually go, well, not the human pantry, the dog food kind of laundry room pantry. So I'm going to go home when I get back home tomorrow and actually check that and see if it's a U.S.-made pig ear or if it's coming from overseas. But either way, I mean, everybody out there having this knowledge that, when you are touching your fish food, this is something that, if it's made here in the USA, because of, you said USDA or FDA?
FDA.
Because of FDA regulations, each batch is being tested for salmonella.
They call it what, babe? Assay?
An assay.
Assay test, right?
Yeah, an assay. Right. That's a fancy clinical diagnostic term. I worked in that industry for a very small amount of time and had to learn the term assay. No, so that's that's very, very good to know, and that's something that that's one of the things I love doing this podcast is it just fills so many holes of information in my own fish Aquarist experience that even if nobody listened to this podcast, me having this conversation with you and learning things like that, that's really, really valuable.
Well, I'll tell you something interesting. The same mills that produce these products for fish tanks produce a similar product that's used to feed aquaculture, and they don't have to go through this process because that food is not touched by, it's not going to be, it's not going to end up in somebody's living room.
Right, right. And again,
it drives the cost up.
Yeah, and it's not that cost. And it's not that somebody's going to eat the fish food in their house. It's that they're touching it, they're in your home, and they want to make sure that we're protected against that.
Right.
Wow, very cool. So then, okay, cat scrapers.
Well, so the main product are those pellets. So then the next thing I'm going to go one other step before I go to cat scrapers. The next thing we did was flake, and taking a food that's a pellet and make it into a flake with the same formula, and trying to make it into flake is very, very, very difficult. And there's only one company that we weren't able to find, and we went through 6 or 7 people to flake our food over the years, and this one company that we have does it for us, and it's just superb. And the thing is, when you get back home, take another person's flake and put it on a table, and then take our flake and look at it with a magnifying glass, and you'll see ours doesn't have a lot of little lines in it, because it's not made like that. It's actually flat surface that comes through, and it's a crisp. It's not a crisp like Tetra Crisp, because that's a crisp that's made thick.
Yeah.
But this is way thin.
That was one of the first things that I noticed is when I was feeding your you
could almost hear it if
food.
You almost think you could hear it.
So, and as you're touching it and you're feeling their flake and the crispiness of it, just know that there's no salmonella on there. So.
Exactly. And by the way, that assay test for that takes even longer because if it's a flake, and therefore they want to make sure they give it, I think, a 3-week test. They want to make sure because there's so much surface area on a flake.
So that's a funny thing because flake is generally considered it's viewed in our hobby, and Corey and I have different opinions on flake. We both really like flake. That it's kind of this cheap. It's a cheap food. That pellet is superior. But you're telling me that flake is more difficult to make. It also requires a longer test for this higher stringency on this assay test. So it's not really just a throwaway food. It's something that we actually have to put forth a lot of effort to produce.
Exactly. Well, Tetra and Worley are the big flake people. They've been flaking They've been flaking for 40, 50 years.
I like that you use that as a verb.
Right.
They've been flaking. Who's going to flake me?
Right. They've been flaking food for a long time.
I flake all over this place.
And they do it in such huge, almost too hard to think about quantities, that it's a whole different process than what we do. I mean, in the amount of time that we can produce 500 pounds of flake, Tetra and Worley can produce 10 tons of it. So it's a different process. And in our process, it probably costs 20 times as much to make it as it does theirs. That's why you can go into a store and you can buy a thing of Tetra Flake for $1.34, and that's more than it costs me just for before it starts. That's the more than my ingredients cost.
Yeah.
So,
but I think we all have. Americans especially, we have this appetite for artisanal, for things that are made slower, more small batch production. You see it in whiskey, you see it in farm to table goods, you see it in our food supply chain, that people really want things that are of a higher quality, and they're willing to pay, I don't want to say a ton more, but they're willing to pay a little bit more, a reasonable amount for additional quality.
Exactly.
And I think this kind of intersection of what we're talking about with brands like Xtreme and some of the other artisanal fish food brands out there.
There's some very good brands out there.
Yeah, that's what you see, and that's what people really want to feed their fish.
Right. And there's two kinds of fish people. There's the educated and then there's the uneducated. The educated person generally becomes a really good aquarist, and he's going to find the best food. In fact, I could tell this educated aquarist that all you need is to feed your fish 365 days of the year, 1.5, and he's going to tell me, take a hike because it's not fun. He wants to do the tubiflex. He wants to do the frozen shrimp. He wants to, because that's part of it's like being a camera buff. You have all these different lenses, and it does all. It's just like with fish; they want to have all these little gadgets and things with it. So it's true, but that guy that's going to have all those little things is not going to have junk food. He's going to have But there's also the person that says, my kid wants an aquarium.
Yeah.
So let's go down to Walmart or Target or PetSmart and spend $150 and get the tank that's all set up, which is the way to get kids involved and get them off the iPhone. And let me just say this, 30-gallon tank is the smallest you should get your kid, because anything smaller than that, if he makes a mistake, you're going to kill everything.
Yeah.
30-gallon tank, he can recover. So you got to get him a tank, and then next thing you know, the kid's involved in it, and then you overfeed, or you feed it junk food, and the water gets cloudy, and the fish die. You don't change. That's what happens. You've got to get educated in it, but it's not hard. Fish keeping is not hard. It's not expensive. It doesn't cost even a tenth of what golf costs, and your kid will love it. Your kid will love it.
Yeah. Yeah, I dabbled in a little golf, so I know.
Yes.
I know that golf can
fly
can get
fishing,
up there.
boating, skiing, any of those things you want are going to cost enormous.
Yeah, fish keeping's not hard, but you just have to be dedicated to do your water changes.
Yes.
And I mean, and that's the thing. Like, you could skip a couple days of feeding, and your fish will be just fine. But you can't skip those water changes. No.
But even those don't have to be terrible. 25%.
No.
How hard is that?
If you do, I mean, so 5-gallon Home Depot bucket, pretty common item in people's garage. If you just siphon out that much water,
right,
and put new water of that same volume, that's a whole 15-minute
every
process.
2 weeks. If you want to. If you want to be cool, do it every week. But let's say you're lazy, okay, every 2 weeks, you can get away with it.
Yeah, and you're not too overstocked, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And you know what? Aquariums not only have fish, they don't only have water, but they have plants.
Mm-hmm.
And aquatic plants, some of the aquatic plants are the most beautiful things you've ever seen in your life.
Yeah.
You know?
I remember when...
and you were telling me about some product that you have for aquatic plants, which we're going to go home and get. We're going to order some. What is it called?
Easy Green.
Easy Green.
Yeah, Easy Green.
That's she's a plant person.
Yeah.
So we're going to set up a plant tank again and use Easy Green.
I think most listeners know, but full disclosure, I am an employee of Aquarium Co-Op. I'm the director of operations, so this is promos and plugs abound in my podcast. So,
exactly.
So enjoy those while they're in there.
Yeah, so anyway, we got the flake. Right now we have krill, we have spirulina, we have a krill and spirulina combination, which we call crave, and we have a goldfish flake, and those are our 4 flakes. After that came along, the next product we came up with is called scrapers, and it's got the protein in it is a green pea. And it's a very, very hard pellet. It's about 5 to 7 millimeters.
How did you end up on green pea? How did that come about?
Because we're trying to do if we could the best thing you can feed Pecosmus is stinging nettles. That's what's in the water. The composition, the compound that's in the water in South America. If you go to all those cypress plants and stuff, and you see those fish are down there scraping on it, that's what they're looking for. Is that stuff that's in stinging nettles. You can't get stinging nettles consistent in the United States. You can only get them in Asia.
Okay.
So we substituted it. We try to find something. We found out that green pea is as close as you can come to the stinging nettle. So we use that as our protein, even though we have shrimp in there and there's some herring in there, with octopus in there. We have spirulina, but green pea is our first ingredient. It's about a 32% to 34% protein product, a little bit on the low end because plecos and stuff like that, catfish don't like high protein products. Right. And it's very, very hard, so that if you put it in your tank, the fish that's it was designed for a nocturnal, so they feed all night, and they come up to it and they scrape on it. Mm-hmm. And that scraping is what we call scrapers, obviously, is what mimics what they do in real life when they go on the sides of the branches and the trees. And what they're getting the cellulose from the plant, from the root, but they're not going after the cellulose. They're going after that algae that's on it. So the green pea has a little bit of that cellulose kind of stuff in it. That's why it's a great product.
Yeah,
it's a great product.
So that was something where, not that fish food is supposed to look beautiful by any stretch of the imagination, but these wafers, you look at it and it's like, that's not a pretty looking wafer. And that's, again, incredibly silly. I submit to that is a very silly thought to come across in my head when I'm viewing fish food. But you go and feed it and it instantly sinks to the bottom, right? That makes sense.
Exactly.
And within, 30 seconds, my super red bristlenose are out. In the other tank, the albinos are out. Yep. And I'm like, wow, that seems like a pretty fast response time for these guys. Yep. And they're going to town. And then
and they just move it all over the bottom of the tank.
The super red tank, they actually co-inhabit with some, I don't even know what variety, just standard, really pretty assorted guppies. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden the guppies then start going after it. Yep. And so now it's this smorgasbord of these beautiful guppies, and these super reds are just going to town on this stuff. Yep. I posted it on Instagram. People, seem to really like that post. Yep. And they wanted to know what it was, and I told them it was going to be a secret because not that it's a huge secret, but I wanted to wait until Aquarium Co-op was officially carrying this stuff, which by the time this comes out, it should be. We should be carrying. We should have it in stock. Good. But yeah, no, I mean that's really, really good food. I really like feeding that. It seems like my shrimp also go to town on it as well. Yep. So that is a really, really good food.
You mentioned shrimp. There's another food before we went to this one that was called Monster, and I'll get back to that. But we have a new product that came about 2 years called Shrimpy, and it's the same low, 34%, because shrimp, again, don't like a lot of protein. And it has a lot of the ingredients that are in scrapers, but it's designed for shrimp, and it's not our. That's the only food in our line that we didn't develop.
Okay.
The company that remember you asked me, do they make other things besides tropical fish food? I told you they do bird food, and they do. Okay. One of the things they do is they build a product for the shrimp industry.
Nice.
And so we took that product and changed it a little bit so it would work in aquarium.
Like food shrimp.
For food shrimp.
Okay.
Right. Because in aquarium it's a closed situation, whereas when out in the field they can just throw it in the water, and what happens to it. So we had to make sure that it would work in a closed environment, and also we wanted it to work with those new colorful shrimp, the new ones that everybody's loving. So it took about 2.5 years to get it down, but we've had it on the market. It's doing quite well. We call it Shrimpy. But before we came up with that, we came up with Monster, and Monster is a combination of the 1.5 3.0, our mainstay, and the scraper. And that's what the Monster is. And it's about a 9 millimeter extruded pellet. It looks like a cylinder, and it's designed for those dove eye.
Okay.
Large silver dollar, all those large fish that they can pull them into their gills, and they rake them over their gill, whatever those things are called back there, and they scrape them, and it crumbles them all up, and they eat them. And you'll notice that when the fish eat them, they don't expel a lot of stuff out of their gills. They get it all. They're able to get. But it's one of those things that we didn't realize it. But we got a lot after about a year or so. We got people telling us that they would feed their fry. We say, fry, the thing's this big. So no, we'd stick it in the bottom of the tank, and the fish would nibble on it, eat on it, eat on it, eat on it. When they got tired of it, we'd just take a pipette and suck up what was out because it would dissolve.
Nice. And
it just stayed in that one little space. So it feeds it anything from a little, like those little fry you saw at the farm, all the way up to, huge fish.
Nice. No, that's good stuff.
Yep. We have pond food, which is the same. We have a koi and we have a goldfish pond food, which is just the same product, only floating. What we do is we just add a little bit more starch to it, and it doesn't have as much weight to it, so it floats. And that's our line.
Let me ask you a question. What do you think is the biggest misconception when it comes to fish food?
I think it's the same thing. It comes with dog food. We have a dog at home, and all he eats is dry food and a little bit of meat that we add, canned meat, and that's all he eats. I guess the biggest misconception is that the fish need a lot of variety. They don't. Rick's farm, all they feed them is 1.5 day in and day out, and those fish go from birth to being sold, which is about 6 months, and that's all they've ever eaten. And they're hearty, they're wonderful. In the lake, they don't get a lot of variety. They eat the same thing over and over and over again. So it's just every time you put in a new food in your tank, it's not. You got to remember, you're not an ocean, you're not a lake, you're not a river, you're a closed environment. Whether it's 20 gallons, 50 gallons, or 100 gallons, the more water you have, the more fish you have. And every time you introduce a new food in there, you introduce something to the water column, something to the water, and it just changes everything. So the less you do, the better you're going to be. I can almost guarantee if you did nothing but feed them that one food that you found they liked and it had all the stuff they needed, that's all you need to do.
That's an interesting perspective I've heard, and this podcast isn't necessarily the format to debate too much in depth. I like to get all of my guests' perspectives and let the audience digest it. I've had some guests on that do propose kind of a mixed variety, which makes sense. But then also what you're saying though, with the fact that a lot of fish foods already have a lot of the nutrients and things that fish need, that not introducing unknown variables. And some of that could also be, well, if you pick up a new food, you don't know how quickly it deteriorates the water quality. So you may be used to feeding one food that you kind of know when you need to siphon, when you need to get it out of the water after maybe a heavy overfeeding, or maybe there's another food that dissolves much faster, and you just don't have that same knowledge and that same intimacy with it. So that's an interesting.
And we're old school. My brother and I, we started this stuff back in the 70s, and back then the only thing that we had was like a simple food like we made, and brine shrimp. I mean, brine shrimp was it. You either sold it, you either fed it to your fish dead, or you made it and you sold it to them alive. So we didn't see all that variety. We didn't have all. You go to we have a wonderful fish shop in Melbourne. Can I name it?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
It's called Nahaki's. It's just fantastic. It's not very big.
You said
Nahaki, Nahack. Right,
been
around forever.
Shout out to Nahaki.
Yeah, they're the best. And we have and they have every kind of food you can think of in there, every kind of gadget and all that kind of stuff in there. And it's so there's something for everybody. But they feed their food They're fish in the store all one. I don't know if they feed them ours when we have it in the store, but they just and their fish are healthy, and it's wonderful.
And it's hard to argue when you see the proof is in the pudding. Again, using that saying, when you go to a fish farm, that the livelihood, your brother's livelihood, is on this fish farm. He's going to do everything in his power to make sure that he's setting himself up to be as successful as possible, and to go into something as important as feeding, and to shoot himself in the foot by doing something incorrect. No, I mean, I guess it's good to have another perspective, right? To have
right. And that's where I'm coming from. I am not an expert on that. I mean, we go to shows and meet people all the time, and there are aquarists out there that have done things that I couldn't even conceive of. So I would, if someone, I'm not disputing what other people do. I'm just saying it on the farm. We go from a fry all the way up to growing them up through all the challenges of getting them to that size. Then you've got to make sure you get them ready to pack, and then you put them in the most stressful situation they'll ever be on, an airplane, for anywhere from 5, 6, 10 hours in heat. And that fish has to get on the other end and not be stressed out with ick,
Yeah.
And that also, a lot of that is just that animal husbandry, like we're talking about.
Yeah, and honestly, there's probably so much room still to do on just getting consistent water changes and keeping the water clean that we're decades and light years from even having a true battle on food.
Yes.
You know what I mean? That just get the water changes down, right? Just keep clean water quality.
Keep water.
And then we can go to battle when it comes to food.
But I will say this, as being a food manufacturer, that if you use the right food, your water will stay cleaner longer. Because
I can get behind that.
What you're what the byproduct of food is ash. Ash is the poop part of food, and the lower your ash content, the better your tank is. Generally, when you see a tank that's a little bit cloudy, that's ash in there in the water. It's not just the pH change, but the ash. So a good quality food gets ingested. You don't feed as much of it, and so the water stays cleaner. It gives a heads up, makes it easier to keep an aquarium if you feed the right food. But there's no question about it. The most two important things are water quality and food. Those are the two things, nutrition and
that's awesome. So how can people get a hold of you? And I'll make sure that I've got links in the show notes to this episode. So
XtremeAquaticFood.com.
Okay.
And that's with no E. XTREME, aquaticfoods.com.
Okay. So we'll have a link to that. Do you guys, are you on Instagram, Facebook?
Instagram, Facebook,
okay.
Twitter.
Right. So we'll have tweeting. Nice.
We don't use it, but we have a tweeting thing.
So do I.
And we're also on YouTube.
If I actually pulled up Twitter on my app right now, it would ask me for my password, and I wouldn't be able to
never
use
it. Right.
So there is an Aquarius Podcast Twitter, but that doesn't get used. So I'll make sure I've got links to all those in the show notes. Right. Andy, Keita, thank you so much. Again, having, what do we got, some 80s music in the background while recording this? And the hymn.
Yes. And no airplane. I haven't heard a single airplane go overhead. I thought we'd hear that.
I think we're just being too loud.
Yeah, maybe so. Having too much fun.
All right, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So much.